I was recently watching a debate between somebody who was advocating Bitcoin and another person who was advocating gold, and they were debating each other on which one is the better money. Now, what concerns philosophy is that the advocate of Bitcoin was using an argument from relativism. He says nothing has intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is a meaningless term because value has to be subjective in the eyes of the valuer. This argument, at face value, we can see that it's false because it is self-refuting. If what he is saying is true, then there is no value in this statement and we could just disregard it. But in the spirit of Aristotle, we are going to explain why these statements are false. When something is subjective, it comes from the subject. The human being is the subject. The human mind is the subject. So when somebody says that something is subjective, they're saying that it's coming from the mind. And when something is objective, it is outside of the mind. The problem lies when somebody says that just because something is subjective, that it is not real. This is false. Because something is subjective does not mean that it is not real or that it lacks all reality. It just means that the reality is less known to us. Take, for example, this scale of subjectivity. Look at the ice cream. That represents taste. Like some people like vanilla ice cream, some people like chocolate ice cream. How is that known to you? It's known to you because the person has to tell you. You have to ask the individual, the subject, and then they have to tell you. That's how you would verify that statement. So when somebody says chocolate ice cream is good, in order to see if that statement is true or false, you have to ask the person who said it. And then how do you verify it? You have to verify it based on their word, based on their authority. Now that is subjective, but that doesn't mean that there's no reality there. There is a reality. If somebody likes chocolate ice cream and they think chocolate ice cream tastes good, that's real, but it is less known to other people. If somebody says there is a building exists, how do you verify that statement? You can personally go and look at the building. It does not require an authority. You do not have to rely on somebody else's word. You do not have to rely on a secondary source. You can go verify it yourself. You can be the primary source. This is the difference between a secondary and primary source when you're even writing a paper or reading a book. A secondary source is not as good as a primary source. Why? Because the secondary source is based on some authority. Now that doesn't mean that it has no worth. It just means that it's not as good as a primary source. This is the distinction that needs to be made. Because something is subjective does not mean that it lacks all reality or that it's not real. It is just as real. Somebody thinking that vanilla ice cream is good is just as real as the building in front of you. So the further that you go on this scale of subjectivity, the more that you can know the truth or falsity of the statement. This distinction between subjectivity and objectivity is about knowledge. When you think about it, everything starts out subjectively. When you look at a building, you're the subject that is looking at the building. Now, because it is subjective, it's going through your eyes. You're using your eyes to look at the building, so the sight is coming from the subject. You are using your brain to comprehend what the building is. So does that mean that because it comes from the subject, it doesn't exist? This philosophy is a philosophy of relativism. Relativism claims that all knowledge is subjective and therefore it is not real. So a human being, because all knowledge is subjective, cannot make a claim about reality and it is true for everyone. That is relativism. And it is based on this notion of subjectivism. The problem with relativism and this extreme subjectivism is that it totally ignores the objective reality.